Yo guys, what is up? Max in our Path of Exile 2 video, and today we are updating our final form Werewolf Druid build. Now, gonna be honest with you, I wasn't planning on making any more updates to this build, off the simple fact that I felt like we accomplished everything that I wanted to do on the build. We got relatively tanky, we were blasting pinnacle bosses in seconds, we could full clear screens of enemies, and they're just like, felt pretty accomplished with the build, and that's not trying to like brag or anything. It just like felt like we had done everything that I wanted to get out of the build. So why are we making an update? The reason for this update is mainly because on our build, and we're going to explain it a little bit more carefully, but I made a new build playing a Deadeye, and on my Deadeye, without really trying, I got to 35,000 effective EHP, which is pretty tanky. And this build that we had been playing when I left it was around 15,000 EHP. And if you don't know what EHP is, I'm going to explain it in depth in a second. But basically, I wanted to come back to this build and make it tanky. And I checked the like leaderboards for PoE Ninja off the top Druid, like Shred Druid Oracle players in the world. And most players were sitting around like 17 to 20k EHP. Our build was at 15, so I felt like, you know, without expending anything crazy, we were doing pretty good. However, with a little bit of investment, we've now raised our EHP to 30,000 on this build, so we have doubled our survivability, and it didn't cost too much to do. It definitely is an endgame expensive upgrade, but we're saving some divines here, saving some divines there, and what we're netting out is a build that we're not really losing any damage. We actually have more damage than we did in the last update, but we now have twice as much survivability. This build is a build that's never struggled with damage. We've always been like boss melting, always clearing screens, but the survivability started to become a little bit of an issue, especially once you try to start like juicing maps. You know, you could spend multiple divines just putting all of the juice onto a map, and if you have a chance to die in that, that can feel really bad. So we've made this build very, very tanky, and so I want to break down everything you guys need to know. Hope you enjoyed the breakdown. Sorry for the long-winded intro. Let's do this. So the first thing I want to explain is what the heck is EHP. That stands for your effective hit pool. And your effective hit pool isn't just how much damage you could take in one hit. For example, like I've got 2,000 life right now and 3.3k energy shield. Where I left this build off, by the way, we had 1,500 energy shield. So we've more than doubled our energy shield, which definitely makes us more tanky. But for example, on my Deadeye build, we had like 1,700 life and 2,000 energy shield, and we were at 35k EHP. So your EHP is not just like how much life plus energy shield you have. It is your survivability multiplied by your defenses, things like evasion. It's your effective, how much damage it would take to kill you. So it takes into account your resistances, your armor, your evasion, everything, your energy shield recharge, your recovery, all of those things take into account basically how tanky you are, and this build is now twice as tanky as it was in our last update. So basically, how did we do that? So now let's go over the big changes, and I do want to preface that these changes are optional. These are expensive upgrades to the build if you want to push it further and min-max it. But like, for example, the build, how we left it was, you know, doing all of the content. It was melting bosses, clearing screens. It just wasn't quite as tanky as I would have hoped it to be. So that's what we're really focusing on here. So the first thing that we wanted to do with our skill tree, and my goal was to get to 3k energy shield. We had 1.5k at the last update, so I wanted to pick up some big energy shield nodes. And so we've done that by picking up Enhanced Barrier for the increased energy shield and Max Life converted to energy shield. It's got some small energy shield nodes on the way. We also go up to Heavy Buffer to get a bunch of energy shield, and a percentage of our damage taken bypasses energy shield, which we don't really care about. And that allows us to, you know, get a little bit more survivability. However, we didn't have many points to mess around with. What points are we losing that we could pick up these things and pick up these things while not losing damage? And so my solution to this, which was very tricky to figure out, is we ended up using a from nothing diamond. Now, this is 10 divines currently. The price of it might go up after this video, just a heads up. But I bought this for 10 divines and allows us to allocate passives in the blood magic radius without actually taking blood magic. So we can spec that in. We don't have to actually put blood magic in, but we can spend 1 skill point to get In Your Face. We can spend 1 point to get Project Bulwark, spend a point to get Prism Guard, and spend a point to get Vengeful Fury without having to allocate any of these small little passives leading up to it. So that was a huge point save. Huge. We were saving all of these little nodes. We were saving all of these little nodes. We're saving all of these little nodes. That saved me like 8 skill points, I think it was in total, around this area, which is huge. And it also allows us to pick up Vengeful Fury, which also gives our every rage, also gives us 1% increased armor. So just off of rip here, this is giving me 69% increased armor. So huge extra node there. And then when we picked up the energy shield nodes, I actually originally was planning on going all the way to Patient Barrier. I POB'd and tested around with going Chaos Inoculation and going a full energy shield build. I didn't like that quite as much, actually. And while Patient Barrier is very good, it was an extra few skill points to get this over Heavy Buffer, which is why we ended up going Heavy Buffer. But this is the skill tree, and this is now we have a lot of energy shield. Now, the next thing to talk about was how do we recover our energy shield with us having a lot. For example, when I had like 100 life regen and 1,500 energy shield, that felt pretty fine because we were regenerating enough life, and it felt like we had good recovery. Now that I've got more than double, I wanted to find a way to upgrade our life regen to be able to match the amount of shield that we had. And so I bought a Grand Regalia, which had life regen per socket filled. And you'll notice that it's not what I'm wearing anymore, and that's because I decided against it. So I bought a Grand Regalia with life regen per socket filled, and that cost me around 14 divines to do. And that gave me, on paper, a 150 life recovery per second while standing still. And that means that I would have a over 3,000 energy shield with around 150 energy shield per second, which, if you're doing the math, is not super great recovery. Even with a Grand Regalia with life regen per socket on a 5 socket, it didn't feel like scaling energy shield Zealot's Oath was really able to upkeep with us. And you'll note right now, my energy shield regen, instead of being 150, which it was with the other Grand Regalia, it's now 1187 on a 2.5 second delay. Meaning if we don't get hit for 2.5 seconds, which is fairly easy on this build because everything's frozen and screens are getting deleted, we're recovering basically a third of our energy shield per second, which feels awesome. And so I ended up not going for the life regen Regalia. We'll talk a lot more about Regalia in a second. And not going for Zealot's Oath, which is a big change to the build. And you're wondering then, like, how are we going to get energy shield recovery without spending that node? And the answer is Adamant Recovery. Adamant Recovery gives our increases and reductions to armor also apply to energy shield. Those recharge rate at 40% of their value. Meaning if I have a 100% increase to my armor values, I would get 40% increased energy shield recharge rate. And you'll note by making some of these changes, we were able to pick up nodes that give us a lot of percentage armor. Vengeful Fury gives us a lot of percentage armor. I also slightly retooled the start of the skill tree to get all of these like percentage increases of armor. And we've got some other like nodes for Dependable Ward for faster start of energy shield and increased energy shield recharge. Scales of the Wyvern also gives us faster start and increased start. So we're spending like basically 2 new nodes to get energy shield recharge. Well, I guess it's technically like 3 new nodes. We don't have to worry about all of the nodes we were spending on just getting a little bit of life regen. And because we're picking up so much armor now, which we'll talk about with the Grand Regalia, we're able to get a ton of energy shield recharge delay and regen. So not only is my like 3+K energy shield now very good for our build because it's going to allow us to take a further max hit, but it also is up more often and more reliably, and it'll saves us some slots on our gear. And so I know this kind of flies in some of the faces of the things that I was saying prior, but once you start scaling energy shield and scaling armor and min-maxing, I do think that this is the best way to go. And it also allowed us to pick up a Cower before the first one, which is a ton of damage. So we're supplementing some of the things that we went missing with like some of the like life regen and recovery. Skill tree is mainly the same, but we can get some more damage and some more survivability. The next thing to mention is our gear, which for the most part is staying unchanged, except for the Grand Regalia. Now, I talked about this as an endgame upgrade to the build in the last video. I said if you wanted to go for something like this, it'd be great for the build, and I thought that was going to be the last update, so I didn't buy one. But now that I wanted to update the build, I ended up buying one. Now, why is this chest piece important, particularly for our current setup? Now, the big kicker here for our particular build is the line increased global defenses per socket filled. This gives us a percentage increase to our armor, evasion rating, and energy shield. So this, right now with 5 sockets, is giving me 55% increased energy shield and 55% increased armor. Now, that's really great because this chest piece inherently doesn't come with that much armor. It doesn't come with that much energy shield, right? So why is this important? And the main reason is, like, you could go for I tested it with some different pieces. If this is basically like the equivalent with the percentage increases to armor and energy shield, it's basically the equivalent of picking up like a 1,200 armor with like a ton of energy shield chest piece. So the global defenses makes up for the fact, but the thing that global defenses provides that picking up flat armor and energy shield doesn't is percentage increases to armor. Once again, as we just mentioned in our skill tree, increases and reductions to armor now apply to energy shield. So if you picked up a increased armor and energy shield chest piece that had like a 1,200 armor, that percentage increases are local. That's just flat armor and flat energy shield. This is global increases, which means that this applies to adamant recovery. So now we get 55% increased armor, 55% increased energy shield, and that increased armor will apply to our energy shield recharge rate. So picking the Grand Regalia is actually really good for making our energy shield recharge very, very quickly. Now, the next thing to mention with this Regalia is that which one do you want to buy? So you definitely want a Grand Regalia with increased to global defenses. You definitely want a Grand Regalia with to spirit. And then the last thing you get is dependent on your budget. So, for example, you could buy one of these with a percentage to all elemental resistances per socket filled. With 5 sockets, that's currently going for about 35 divines. I didn't have 35 divines to spend on a chest piece. This one with +2 life costs about 4 divines. And if you wanted to go for a mana for your mind over matter instead of life, costs about 1 divine. And so kind of depending on your budget, if you have unlimited budget, I would go for one with like all elemental resistances that will free up a bunch of reses on your rings so that you could go for, like leech and more damage and more rarity. You could also go for chaos res and then just kind of ignore chaos res on all of your other gear. And then you could go for, rarity and resistances and things like that on your rings and your boots. It is up to you depending on your budget. I picked up max life because it is very cheap. However, it still gives us a lot of extra survivability. Once again, kind of dependent on your budget there. But we're really looking for increase to global defenses and increases to spirit because you want to supplement the amount of spirit you're going to lose. And then the last socket is basically dependent on your budget. You can adjust the build to whatever you can kind of afford. And then I would definitely make sure that you get at least like 10 spirit. I don't think it can roll lower than 10. No, I can't roll lower than 10, so I've got kind of a min roll on the spirit. So you could potentially fit, if you had like a max roll to spirit, you could potentially fit in another like aura onto this as well. But this is the Grand Regalia that I picked up for the build. The only other really change to the build is I picked up a helmet with more armor. My old helmet had about 700 armor. This one's got 1,240, and it still got some max life, and our armor applies to elemental damage. This one did cost me 8 divines. I was thinking you could technically go for an armor ES or armor energy shield hybrid helmet and still pick up runic helm. Getting more armor on this gave me a lot more survivability, but it also gave me a lot more energy shield because with runic helm per 1 energy shield, our armor on our item, we get 1 energy shield. So this is also a very nice pickup for increasing our energy shield. It could go even further if we wanted to min-max even more and pick up better boots. I do need to buy some 35% movement speed boots, and I don't need this life regen as much anymore, but picking up like a 400 ES boot would give us crazy amounts of armor with iron slippers. But that is kind of the main upgrades to the build. We can now pick up some cool charms for the build as well. This is the Nascent Hope. I think this is 1 annul right now. This grants us immunity to freeze. We were using a freeze immune charm. However, its special effect didn't benefit us. It now does. Now, whenever we would become frozen, we instantly recharge our energy shield. Our energy shield just starts recharging immediately. So this is a nice survivability tool now that we care about energy shield recharge. And I also picked up the For Utopia Stone charm. We were using a Cannot Be Stunned charm. This now, whenever we would have been stunned, we now defend with 200% of our armor during effect. So we are just very, very tanky with these 2 changes. I'm still using the Arakali's Gift to use when we become poisoned so that we have immunity to poison. And also it gives us our mana and life recovery if we would be poisoned. Super, super nice. The last mention to talk about is our weapon. Now, the weapon that I've been using for most of the footage that you've watched is around a talisman that I crafted for about 6 divines. You can buy one of these for like 10 right now if you don't want to craft it yourself. In the grand scheme of like spending on a weapon for endgame, it's relatively cheap. And we're mainly using this weapon for the % of the extra damage as Fizz for the explosion tech. As I've mentioned in previous videos, you can use something that has more base damage and still do the explosion tech, simply off of the fact that we do have the gain 10% damage as extra Fizz. I did mess around taking this off and using something like this Magi Talisman, which has a bonus to rage. It's got the crit chance, so it's got the same amount of crit chance, if not a little bit more, than a Spiny, and this has got more DPS than my Spiny, and this netted out me more like single target boss damage. Trying out this, I was using it on some pinnacle bosses. It absolutely shreds. However, I still like the quality of life of the Spiny Talisman with the % as Fizz. I did notice a little bit more explosions with this. However, once again, if you do not want to use a % extra Fizz Talisman for explosions, if you have a lot of currency, you can pick up an Natal's Embrace. This gives you 40% of your Fizz damage as extra Chaos and 20% of your Chaos damage dealt by your supported skills, breaks armor. You can use this with like a Heart of the Well with bonus Chaos damage, and then slap that into Herald of Armor without the bonus Fizz, and you'll be breaking armor just as well. A very expensive upgrade, but it is possible to use on the build. For our skill gem supports, they're basically all unchanged, except we added Garakon's Resolve into Shred. Now, I was asked about this a whole bunch when the league started to see if this would be good for the build. And I told everyone that asked me that this wouldn't work with inevitable crits because it says your maximum crit chance with supported skills is 50%, and with inevitable crits, I was assuming that this would basically be giving you more than 100% crit chance because we always crit. That doesn't function how I thought it would. The inevitable crits isn't an impact on our base crit chance. It's just that we will eventually crit. And so it doesn't have any downsides for using Garakon's Resolve. We don't lose inevitable crits with this, which means that we always crit, and Garakon's Resolve allows our skills that when they crit to have a chance to basically crit again, which when they do crit again, they get double crit damage. So this is insane synergy with inevitable crits because we basically just pick up this one support. It's very, very expensive. One of the most expensive supports in the game. But it's I think on POB, it's a 30 to 40% damage increase for picking up. In terms of where you could spend your divines for damage increases, this is actually one of the largest damage increases you can pick up on the entire build, even more so than picking up a better weapon. It is kind of crazy the amount of DPS that this gives, and so we're picking up Garakon's on shreds. We're using it with rapid attacks, long fuse, close combat, Garakon's Resolve, and overextend. Note for pinnacle bosses, you can actually put Rakiata's Flow on shred. I'll replace sometimes long fuse for Rakiata's, and then if you don't have Rakiata's, just put cold penetration here, because you still want to freeze in normal time. That will give our shred just ludicrous amounts of damage. Still using mana remnants with our potency, harmonic, and Katal's rejuvenation for the 40% cooldown. Lunar Assault with Batar's Deep Freeze, Elemental Armament, Magnified Area, and Rakiata's Flow. Lunar Blessing is unchanged with Magnified, Cold Pen, Elemental Armament, Cooldown Recovery, and Bloodletting. Pounce has got Blazing Crit, Marcus Siphoning, Freezing Mark, Cold Exposure, and Shocking Leap. Savage Fury, we've got Prolonged Duration. Herald Device, still doing all of the armor tech stuff with Urok Smelting, Armor Break, and Armor Explosion. Magnified Area 2 and Elemental Armament. Arctic Howl, Tireless, Raging, Echoing, Second Wind, Brittle Armor, Cross Slash, Magnified, Heavy Swing, Heft, and Cull. And then Eternal Range has got Clarity and Cannibalism. Guys, that's going to do it for the build update. I'll be updating the Maxwell Planner. By the time you watch this video, it'll be fully updated. But a lot of the times I get comments like, oh, yo, is there like a budget version of this build? That just broke. But the Maxwell Planner will have all of the budget versions in the planner. So for example, if you're just starting at the end game, you can look at the end game side. If you're getting into T15s, you can look at those upgrades. There's like an end game gear for like just kind of starting out mapping versus like uber end game. All of these things will have like, you know, progression built in. So if you are just starting the build and this video seems overwhelming or like there's too much going on, note that there are previous videos, and also you're able to kind of look at the planner, kind of the old stuff. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.